Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili Gianarakos, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Yariv. We're getting closer and closer to the draft, so I'm excited as we kind of inch up. And there's going to be a lot more to talk about, obviously, with the draft upcoming, any potential moves the Flyers might make, and then free agency around the corner as well. So we're getting into that fun period of the offseason, which is great.
Yeah, we're inching towards the actual interesting part of the off season, and getting close. Right now, we're like kind of in that lull. We talked about it last week. Not too much to talk about, so we're digging a little bit, but we do have some news and whatnot to talk about, so we'll be all right. Okay, before we begin, just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notifications. Share our stuff out if you can. That's a humongous help to us. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify and give us a rating there as well. All of that is tremendously helpful. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So for those of you who subscribe, thank you all so much. For those of you that are listening that have not subscribed, if you can do so, that would be amazing. It is the best way to support our show. And also a shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. They are reopened as of May 1st, so you can go there and enjoy a great Philly cheesesteak. And also shout out to Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for all your insurance adjustment needs. Have your insurance claims double checked by them. They will assist you and help you combat your potentially egregious insurance claims. Again, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Okay, let's get into it. We have some news. I guess it's all just topical stuff today. We'll talk about the draft a little bit, and we'll talk about some prospect stuff, and then we'll end with just current playoffs, about what's going on with the Oilers and the Panthers. So first piece of news. So Carter Hart appeared in court, or at least his lawyer appeared in court, criminal court. All we know so far, judging from that, I'll leave Vasili to kind of read out the tweet that we had from Rick Westhead. But that there won't be a date set before August 13th, and it looks like it might be a 2025, late 2025 criminal court date, which we kind of suspected. We thought maybe as late as 2026. But it looks like this is going to drag on for, I don't know, what seems like way too long, but at least another year at this point. Vasili?
Yeah, exactly. So just as being somebody from Canada, I can say that our court system really backlogged. So it's not surprising to me, as I've said on the show in the past, that we might not even get a trial till late 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if it's even 2026. Like any initial prediction they get, usually tack on a couple months. So we'll see where it goes, but obviously not the best of news for trying to kind of get this out of the way and for the Flyers to figure out maybe what's going on with, the property technically that they will still hold the rights to in Carter Hart as they move ahead. So just to read Rick Westhead's tweet, this is what he reported. Lawyers for the 5 former 2018 World Juniors hockey players charged with sexual assault appeared virtually in a London court this morning. A trial date won't be set before August 13th, when the case will be discussed in assignment court. A criminal lawyer who works in London and has no ties to the case told Rick Westhead that because of court backlogs, it's doubtful the Hockey Canada trial will begin before late April 2025 at the earliest. Lawyers have also told Westhead the trial is expected to take at least 2 months once it does get started. Dylan Dubé, Alex Formanton, Carter Hart, Michael McLeod, and Cal Foote were charged with sexual assault in January as it pertains to the open case. So not too much news in terms of, okay, like what's actually happening with the case, but apparently there should be something scheduled in the near future here, likely late August, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I haven't really been paying too close attention to this. I don't think you
There
have
hasn't been
either.
much news.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like with these criminal things. Now, I think there is a deadline set by the NHL, and um I think the NHL has put it on the teams to initiate if they're going to retain their rights by offering them a contract. But what team is going to offer these guys a contract with the criminal court case hearings a year away? So I don't know what's going to happen with the rights of the players involved. Like, we don't know what's going to go on with
Yeah.
Carter Hart if he is. And again, they have to be acquitted. Let's make that clear. If they are found guilty, nobody's getting a contract. But if they
No
are
teams touching them, yeah, with
right,
potential
exactly.
pull.
If they're acquitted, I think there will be conversations of contract. Whether the Flyers will bring back Carter Hart, I don't know. I think it
Too
kind
early
of
to tell.
depends. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what goes on with Erson and what goes on with Fedotov and what happens with Kolosov. And again, we're still getting word that Kolosov's a maybe, but I don't really buy that either. Um, so I think it depends what happens here. But look, let's be honest, the talent that is Carter Hart, at that prime age, he'll be what, 27, around 27 years old.
28, yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
so, but when he potentially could come back to the NHL, I think there would be discussions. I don't think no team would be interested. I think the Flyers would consider it if they're looking for a goaltender at the time. But again, it depends on all depends on the court cases. If they're found guilty, nobody's going to touch these players, and that's just the reality of what we're looking at.
No, yeah, exactly. There's not really too much to add, right? Officially, the teams technically still hold their rights, but once that, July 1st date hits, if they're not qualified, obviously they would become UFAs. So I would suspect that's going to happen just based on everything that's going on, and no team's going to really want to associate themselves, but we'll obviously see. But I'd imagine that's going to be the likeliest scenario.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're all going to become free agents. And look, maybe there'll be some kind of retrospective done afterwards about who owns their rights and, if the player wants to come back. But I imagine this is where like relationships kind of play in. Like if the Flyers have a good relationship with the Carter Hart camp, he's found not guilty, and there's an opening in net, I think there's can be a conversation had there. But most of these guys are not coming back,
Yeah.
you know, for the foreseeable future right now. So I don't think that any team's going to be jumping to sign any one of them. And it's a shame because the whole thing is obviously potentially just a bad blemish on the NHL to just an awful situation altogether, depending on the levels of truth and guilt involved. So it's really just a lose lose for everybody, and there's not really too much to say, and I don't want to comment until the court system kind of does its thing and the cases are put out there. So, again, if they're found guilty, I don't think any of us are going to want any of these
No.
players on their team, regardless. It's not like anybody's going to be like, oh, well, he gets out of jail in a year, so maybe we'll send. No, I think at that point the conversation ends and these guys go play overseas.
It's a
If
career killer in North
Yeah,
America,
yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. So hopefully there's good news, whatever that would be, depending on what side of this issue you're on. But as of right now, I'm kind of just staying out of it. My assumption is Carter Hart's not part of this team, and the goalies we have here are our goalies. So
Yep.
there's plenty of talent around the world to find other players. So I'm not going to be sitting here resting, worried about one guy. I tend to not do that anyway with trades and other stuff like that. Like Cutter Gauthier to me is like goodbye. You know what I mean? Like you just can't.
You can always replace talent in a sports environment, in a sports
Right,
world. So that's what the Flyers are going to have to do in this situation, which they've already done, bring over a Fedotov, a Kolosov. And I think the team is aware of that as well, that they just have to move forward and kind of put this
right.
behind them until, any new news really surfaces. So
Like yeah, like if they find out the players were acquitted, then they'll worry about it. Up until then,
they're probably
but
not caring,
well,
right? Like,
it's just a distraction, and it's something you can't even strategize for because, well, we don't know where they stand on the issue too. They do have a relationship with Carter Hart, so I'm sure they're not like, oh, screw this guy.
yeah.
But at the same time, if he's guilty, they're not going to be like, oh, it's okay, buddy, we'll give you a con. No, it's going to
No,
be like, no,
definitely
dude,
not.
you gotta reap what you
Well,
sow, and if you did something disgusting, you're gonna have to pay for it
100%, right? Like, obviously, if that's the case, I mean, all of them need to be, charged with what happened here in that
accordingly.
situation.
Yeah,
Exactly. I think it's just like a situation for the Flyers where they can't really control anything anyway, so why worry about it until
yeah.
there is something that pertains to us
and
eventually
and
again.
that's what I would say to anybody listening is don't worry about this. Like not on a team based level. If you're worried about it from like a cultural level, that's one thing. I'm not going to tell people what to care about. But if you're worried about it from a roster spot, don't, because it's
Yeah.
not
The
it's not
Flyers likely aren't as well. So at
right.
this point,
Yeah, they're trying to move forward without a doubt. Okay, next piece of news. It's like, man, it's shitty news all around. Uh, the second piece of news is we finally got confirmation that Jamie Drysdale did have surgery back in April, which is, I guess, somewhat good news because that means he had surgery right after the season ended. They
smart.
didn't, yeah, they didn't wait. Now that's the abdominal core groin area surgery. I believe it was abdominal core
Yeah,
surgery.
lower body or core muscle area,
Core
essentially.
muscle. Yeah. Okay. So, they say it's not going to affect him, but like, let's be honest. And everybody who's listening to this, I assume you're a hardcore fan. You've seen this happen before. This will affect Jamie Drysdale to a degree. I don't know to what degree. Could be 10%, 20%, 50%, but we've seen it affect every single player. So, those of you who are expecting to have Jamie Drysdale kind of come out the gate, full board, 100% healthy, and, kicking ass, taking names, and, back to his prime skating, that's probably not going to be the case. Could it? Sure, it's possible. I just wouldn't bet on that. And I would imagine that, we're going to be looking at him in a reduced role to some degree from his actual potential. So I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to judge his season based off of that first half that he has next year. But it's going to take at least half the season to get this kid back to where he was prior to the injury or prior to the surgery. Having said that, even injured, he didn't look skating wise, didn't look bad. So maybe it won't affect him too much just because he's such an elite skater. But the reality is that he's going to be somewhat hampered, and we should be ready for that.
Yeah, I think that's a natural thing to expect. I mean, if you have been watching the Flyers for years at this point, or even just players around the NHL who've had this surgery in general, typically it's about a 6 month time period before they're really back to themselves. That's
Yeah.
usually how it goes, like 6 months from the surgery. Like I remember Claude Giroux, obviously similar sports hernia, core muscle surgery. The season after that, I think he only had like 68 or something points. Everybody wanted to trade him, thought he was cooked. Kind of shows how much it can affect a player in their skating, especially if the skating aspect of a player's game is a real forefront to their skill and how they kind of create offense and things like that. Also, another example, Kevin Hayes, right? He came back from that injury, looked noticeably slower until about halfway through the season. You kind of saw him pick things back up, right? And a lot of it with that injury, at least a lot of players and interviews that I've read in the past, they say it's like almost working and building through like the scar tissue that
Yeah.
comes from the surgery. And like essentially it hurts almost like while you're skating and while, you came back. And some players will get almost concerned, like, should it be feeling this way? Should it be feeling this way? And doctors will say it's natural because you're working through that, extra scar tissue that you're trying to kind of, burn off from the surgery. So I think in a sense, like Drysdale is definitely going to be impacted because just look at all the other players that were really good players as well, who also had similar struggles. The only thing though that I will caveat is if he did get the surgery on April 18th, I believe that was the exact date. You do have like all of May, all of June, all of July, all of August, all of September. So that's almost about 5, 6 months. So I
Sure.
wonder with like those other surgeries like Giroux had, Hayes had, maybe it was later in
It
the summer.
was. It was.
Exactly. So
Which I
I
remember
wonder
frustrated me at the time when it happened.
because why not do it as early as possible where it looks like the Briere regime tried that. So he is probably going to come back still impacted, I would imagine. But since there's, more time from April to training camp, hopefully he can kind of work through some of those struggles a little more. And maybe instead of, being impacted for a 6 months into the season, he's impacted about 3 months, right? And you see him like November, December kind of get back on the horse and look more
Sure.
like himself. Yeah, I also there was an interview and like an article put out by Adam Kimmelman who covers the Flyers
Yep.
surrounding this article, or not surrounding the article, surrounding this Drysdale injury and the surgery. So I just want to read a quote from Danny Briere essentially regarding that. So Briere said Drysdale got checked after the season, and there's a significant injury there that he needed surgery on. This was said at the 2024 NHL Scouting Combine. Briere also said Drysdale's surgery was not related to his previous shoulder injury, and that the procedure would allow the defenseman to better showcase his skill set. And Briere also said he wanted to play games. He's had a lot of injuries to deal with the last few years, so he wanted to play. So I give him a lot of credit to play through that. He showed a lot of character, leadership, the way he handled it, but he'll be in a much better position next season and should be a lot freer to play. There's a couple other interesting notes as well. Briere also mentioned about Rasmus Ristolainen that he's also proceeding well in his rehabilitation from surgery. That was April 18th as well to repair a ruptured triceps tendon and should be ready for training camp. It was supposed to be about a 3-month recovery. And then a final injury note is Briere wasn't sure about the future of forward Ryan Johansson. He stated he's going through some kind of rehab. Briere claims he had an injection, and Johansson claims he had a hip injury. And from there, Briere states, at this point, honestly, I'm not too sure where it's at. We're not sure if he's going to need surgery again or if he's going to be ready for camp. We really don't know at this point. And apparently, whatever happens with Johansson will not affect any decision to buy out Cam Atkinson or Cal Peterson if they decide to do so. So that
Yeah.
was just some interesting injury tidbits from that
Well,
article.
I'm glad you added that in there. Actually, I was gonna say that like everyone should recognize that surgery always has a cost. You know, like I know
Yep.
everybody jumps to surgery, but I understand why most people try to put it off and try to heal without it. It's not always 100% necessary, but like it takes time to recover from a lot of these things. And, hopefully Rasmus will be back, kind of back to form. And luckily it wasn't a lower body injury that he has to like skate through. It's an upper body injury, still going to be potential problems there,
Yeah, you
but
can't lift and things like that, but
yeah, it's a big gap on our right side without those two guys. So hopefully they're healthy. As far as Johansson goes, I mean, I would imagine he's probably going to LTIR himself for an entire season.
that's what it seems like, right? Like it seems
Yeah.
like Johansson is like, yeah, like I'm hurt. And then
Well,
the Flyers are like, okay, really you are? Then like come in and we'll evaluate you. And then he's like, well, I have this injury. It seems like there's just such a disconnect between his camp and the Flyers. Like I would never expect Johansson to suit up one game for this organization
yeah,
at this
I
point.
I would suspect that he's going to be on the IR, probably the entire season until his contract expires, and then from there. Now, maybe he was injured because again, this was a pretty high end player. He was never like a star, or he had some good seasons. He was
He
definitely
was
top six.
drafted to be a star.
Right,
Yeah,
but he was definitely a top six forward. I guess it would explain the drop off in production if he was,
for
kind of
sure.
playing through an injury that wasn't going away. And then maybe he was just like, well, I don't want to play in Philadelphia anyway, and I could use the year off type of thing to see if this heals up.
Yeah, because he's only 31, right? Like that would be a
Right.
pretty early for him to retire, albeit, I mean, he got drafted in 2010 and then played in 2011 and has been in the league ever since. So it's been like 13 years, one of those guys that enters the league early. But it is strange to me because, like, he played with Colorado 63 games up until he got traded and had 13 goals. And that's actually like been almost one of his best goal totals in a couple years. So it's kind of strange that he just, comes to the Flyers and
Well,
is magically
when
injured, but yeah,
when you add the fact that the Flyers said they had no interest of having him in the
that
NHL,
plays into it as well for
you know
sure.
what I mean? Like there's something we're not being told about up front.
Of course, yeah.
Clearly some character issues. I mean, we heard about stuff. This is why I was like so down on Cutter Gauthier when I was like, we've seen this type of attitude before. Doesn't usually pan out well for the player when they're so public about like their character issues, about their
Yeah, agreed.
attitude and this stuff. Like they don't usually turn in to be the superstar that they're talked about to be. Now, maybe Gauthier will be still. I mean, the kid's got a lot of talent, so I'm not going to diminish his talent, but you're going to have problems with other people around the league. And it seems like that's where Johansson is. And maybe he was dealing with an injury and wanted to prove something or whatever. But just when you throw the fact the Flyers didn't even, again, we like had a bare bones team, offense, just with injuries at one point, and we still didn't call this guy up or had any interest of even having him around the squad. Like he wasn't even, and that was publicly stated by Briere. Like he's not coming to this team. Like he never once said, oh, we'll look to move him, but if we can't, we'll rotate him in, or we'll at least have,
He
we'll
said, I
have his
don't foresee
leadership.
him. Yeah.
Right. I don't foresee him ever being part of this team. So it's just
Which
like, yeah,
you look at the verbiage and you're like, read between the lines a little bit. I
there's something
definitely
going on
think,
with this guy,
no, of course,
personality wise.
he likely probably doesn't want to be in Philadelphia. And I mean, huge reason could be the relationship with John Tortorella. That kind of exploded, between him and Tortorella back in Johansson's Columbus days, and kind of led to him being traded eventually to Nashville, for Seth Jones there. So I imagine there's something there that probably happened between the two that's
And
just irreparable. And then also, I mean, there's probably just a sour taste in Johansson's mouth from that situation. So he's probably just like, fuck this, right? Like,
yeah, well, like, like a lot of play. So there's obviously the Babcock thing where Babcock calls out players and he's just a huge douchebag, right? And
yeah.
then you want to throw that title on Tortorella because you're like, oh man, it's Johansson and Dubois and Dubinsky. But if you look at these guys, none of them have hit their potential. Not like
Yeah.
none of them. So it's almost like I I have a hard time believing Tortorella is a bad guy like Babcock. It seems to me more he's just super blunt
Yeah.
and
He's
he
hard
just
on his players,
and that he's just like straight up like you are not doing what you need to do to hit your potential. And this
but
guy's
it's
like,
for a
well,
good
what he's
reason,
he seems to
right?
be right. How many players has he called out in some capacity and
And
he
it
was
works.
wrong? Well, I'm saying he was wrong about them.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I
Ke-
can't really bring a
did
list
Kevin
up.
Hayes light the world on fire in St.
No.
Louis? No. And again, I give grace to Kevin Hayes. He went through a lot of shit, and I do believe he's a good guy. I don't think Kevin Hayes is a bad dude. I don't think that was like a personality thing. But we
No.
watched him on the ice. Like he was, you know,
Not playing well. Yeah.
not just not playing well. I mean, he wasn't moving his feet.
He wasn't really, not to say he wasn't trying, but it didn't seem like he was putting in maximum effort, which is
Right.
what John Tortorella is obviously going to be looking for.
Right.
Uh, I just think for Tortorella and some of these types of players, like it's just him being blunt for the sake of, being blunt because he wants to help his team
I don't think he
perform
knows
better.
any other way, too.
Yeah, but it's also like trying to help the player in a sense. I think the players take it like a wrong way. Like he's trying to make you better because he wants you to succeed and live up to that potential. He's not calling you out because like he doesn't like you or something. It's likely because he sees that there is more and he knows that you're not giving, that extra percentage to kind of get to that place. So it's actually more like to try to benefit the player, I would imagine. But some guys don't seem to take it that way. Maybe it's the delivery, but I just think Tortorella is a blunt guy, like you said. And, obviously some people cannot take that approach in certain senses, right?
Yeah.
They need to be coddled or they're not able to kind of, take it that way and like turn it into a positive, even though if it might not even be a negative to begin with. So
Yeah. Like my dad was really blunt. He was my dad was never mean. I realize, especially now as an adult, I understand. My father was never mean to me. If anything, he was too nice to me, with the way I grew up. But he was super blunt. Like he
you have
would
to be
not.
honest sometimes,
He
right?
would just straight up tell me like, you're not working hard enough, or you didn't do enough, or what, like you're making excuses, or what have you done? It was always that attitude that was brought forth to me. So I think that's why I like Tortorella so much, because I'm so used to that attitude of like, yeah, like blunt, like just
Yeah.
tell to the face, you're not working hard enough, you didn't put in the extra effort, you didn't do this, you're not fast enough, whatever. It's like when you hear you're not fast enough, that means you focus extra on skating or whatever.
Yeah.
You lose weight because you're out of shape, which we've seen with some NHL players. That's what
I
projected
think
Jake Voracek's career forward, was getting in shape.
No, I agree. And I also think too that like it's comes from a place of Tortorella not only wanting to like push the player for them to get better, but it's also like a character test in a sense. Like, okay, if I present this challenge and I challenge this guy, how is he
Eh,
gonna respond to the
Yeah, 100,
challenge? And
100%.
and I think he uses it as a multifaceted tool where like, okay, I can push my player to become better and a better version of himself, and I can also see if this guy isn't meant to be here in this kind of environment that I'm trying to build, right? So I
Yeah.
think he uses it probably in two ways, and it can be beneficial in both aspects because
Yeah.
you can almost weed out guys that, hey, like we don't want to build a team around this guy. He's never going to look at himself in the mirror and really blame himself or take the onus on himself. And I think you want guys ultimately, if you're trying to build a successful team, especially hockey, you want guys that are going to be able to take that accountability, put the onus on themselves, look at themselves in the mirror and say, you know what, like maybe we lost that position or maybe we didn't execute that play because I could have done something better versus blaming other players or blaming your teammates. That's how you get things to kind of not function smoothly. So
Yeah, and from what I understand, that's why Ivan Provorov is no longer here.
yep.
And he had that attitude, which is a shame because I loved Provorov as a player, and he had so much potential. Still, I would say he still does. But if what we're hearing is true about him, that would hold him back. And to loop it back to the guys that we were initially talking about, Drysdale and Ristolainen, one that does not seem to be the case from the little we've seen at Drysdale at all. His character seems to be phenomenal. And then Ristolainen, I mean, he's like, I wish I had John Tortorella earlier,
Well,
you know?
they broke his game like when he first joined the team. They broke his game down completely.
Hmm.
And like, think about being a veteran in the league for 6, 7 seasons at that point. He could have took that completely the wrong way and been like, well, like I've been in the league for these many years. I'm not going to change my entire
Right.
game because
But
you
he
think
didn't do
so.
that.
But he didn't. And I also, once again, speaks to your point of good character for Risto, right?
And I think that's why you haven't heard outside of like Twitter people and us saying it, you haven't heard rampant rumors about Ristolainen because I think his attitude is actually probably pretty great. So
Yeah.
I don't think they're like unless you're like and if you look at the free agency market, like I know a lot of people want to be down on Risto, but his dollar value where it's ending up now, if he is the player that he was when he's healthy, assuming that he will be,
It's not a bad
that
deal at all.
it's actually not a bad deal anymore. And there's going to be defensemen of his quality who are going to be getting more money. I would say defensemen who are probably not even as good as him, going to be getting more money than him, just being, big, sizable defensemen. We were talking about Zadorov, who has done less in his career than Ristolainen, and he's looking for 6+ million.
And he's mainly been a third pair guy, maybe like
Right.
number four type guy. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like I do think that Ristolainen specifically like is a guy respected in that locker room, is a guy that the teammates really like, and reason being, I mean, he's a guy that stands up for his teammates, right? He's willing to fight if needed,
Yeah.
willing to go to bat, for his team. So guys in the locker room that doesn't go unnoticed, right? Like guys really appreciate that. So I think for Ristolainen, that's probably why, unless the Flyers are getting fair value or able to unload the full contract, they probably won't look to really move him. But
Yeah.
even like we've been talking about, offline in the past, obviously, that I can't see anybody really wanting to trade for Ristolainen unless he's healthy for a
Healthy.
couple
Yeah.
months first. It just doesn't make a lot of sense from any other team's perspective. Why take on 5 million from a guy that you quite frankly don't know if he's going to come back and be
Be the
healthy again,
same,
right?
yeah, be the same player. I think if Risto is moved, it's going to be a trade deadline, potential next off season. But we might not even be talking about moving him at that point. We'll see what this defense shapes up like. And again, we know the Flyers are not going to be. It's funny. I'm listening to other podcasts, and they're all saying what we've been talking about for a year, which is if you just look at the salary cap, if you look at CapFriendly, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, if you look at CapFriendly and if you look at where the team is cap wise, you know, you can see what their window is. You can see what their plan is if you read their financials and you look at where they are. It's not this year. Like this year is not the year to go out and add a bunch of players and to be
No.
desperately trying to trade guys to do that all that Fletcher stuff where he was kind of flailing his arms as a GM. Like this is actually the year to kind of continue to do what you did last year and vet out and hopefully get some assets for the guys that you do move out because you play well as a team so their value isn't rock bottom. um I think we're building towards that, which this goes right into the next topic. So this was something I actually tweeted. I saw this on the NHL Network's Instagram, and I tweeted it out. And I did not expect to get like 300 likes on this thing. One, I don't tweet out much, so I don't really have much of a following um, on there, and I don't really spend much time on Twitter except for just like glazing for news periodically.
The
Uh,
algorithm like that one, eh?
yeah, I was actually surprised. I did not post it thinking it would get a bunch of buzz, but I was getting a bunch of comments and retweets and all this stuff, and it was really pertaining to the Florida Panthers. And look, we'll get into the actual competition of the game itself, but we talk about building a winner. I've said this. I don't think there's one way of doing it. The reality is, you just need an entire good team. You don't need the best player in the league. You need guys who can play against the best player. I say this every single time. Play against the best players in the league, and there are all different ways along the road to build your contender. It's not going to be just I'm going to tank for 5 years and I'm going to magically end up at the top of the standings. Like that doesn't work either. You have to make the right move. Like even the Edmonton Oilers are where they are today. That was a long process to get there,
Yeah.
and they are a substantially better team today than they were like 2 years into McDavid being on their team with McDavid and Draisaitl, right? Like
Yeah,
they
that comes
added
with the trades, signings, not just
right.
drafting, right?
So well, and sorry, I'll open up to you in a minute here. Let me just go through this actual post. So what I did is I posted the NHL Network's I guess image of the Florida Panthers roster construction and where these players that they kind of built this team off of came from. And so the drafted on the team, there are three names: Barkov, Ekblad, and Lundell. Three guys that they drafted. Via trade, Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, Etu Listerainen, Sam Reinhart, Vladimir Tarasenko, Kyle Pozo, Steven Lorenz, Brandon Montour. Then free agency wise, Carter Verhaeghe, Sergei Bobrovsky, Evan Rodriguez, Nick Cousins, Ryan Lamberg, Kevin Stenlund, Nico Mikola, Oliver Ekman Larson, Dmitry Kulikov, Anthony Stolars, and then the waiver claim Gustav Forsling, who we know what kind of season he's having.
He's been great for them.
Well, they obviously didn't do that overnight, right? Those are what four, and they were competitive.
3-4 years in the making, though,
Right,
right?
exactly. Every year they kind of inched closer to getting to the form that they're in, that they pretty much had for the past couple of years, right? And even that Tkachuk trade, like they were already a really good team, then they made that trade for Tkachuk. Like it just Zito was just their GM is just slowly chipping away at this image that he has of where he wants his team to be and slowly acquiring players and trying it through every which way, which is really the main ways of doing it, which is trade, free agency, and waiver wire, and then the draft as well, right? And they got lucky in the draft where they got some good players, but they traded those players away for other assets or opportunities. In our case, they traded away Owen Tippett, right? They traded away Jonathan Huberdeau. Like they got value from building players internally, trading them away. But primarily, if you look at majority of this team, it's been trades from accumulating assets, right? Which is where the Flyers are. Free agency, which is where the Flyers will be in a year, right? And then a waiver claim, which is lucky as hell to find a guy like Gustav Forsling. So, what are your thoughts there, dude?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion piece just in terms of like how you can build a contender in the NHL and a Stanley Cup contender that is a team like the Panthers. It just shows that there isn't one way of doing it. Like every team, every fan base always loves to scream, well, we're super bad. We need that high end talent. Let's just tank, tank, tank. And then we're going to turn it around in a record amount of time. But as we know, like you look at certain teams that have done that for years and years and, have mainly tried to use the draft and not really parlay any of those draft picks or any of those assets into other players through trade or even look really to add through free agency. It doesn't always work like that. And a lot of the times that losing culture can actually negatively impact you even more than selecting like really high-end guys through the draft, because once you get those players, you're putting them into a culture that kind of isn't supporting losing, but like you're almost in a rut where like, okay, there's nobody on this team that can kind of get us out of this. There's nobody here that is a winner because we stripped it so bare bones that, we're not aware of like what a winning culture really is and how to kind of get out of this losing kind of tailspin. So that's why I think it's really interesting. And I think a lot of teams, right, you can build even more through the draft. Like look at Colorado, a lot more of their team is drafted and they have a really good team. I
Yeah.
think what it really is for roster construction, it's just as a GM, you got to just be on the pulse and
Yeah.
understand the chemistry of your own team and what supplements what and not be afraid really to make moves, right? And I think that's a huge thing with Florida. Like they traded Jonathan Huberdeau coming off a 100-point season. Most GMs would not, and Mackenzie Weegar as well, who was a top 2, top 4 defenseman for them. Most GMs are not gonna have the balls to trade their 100-point player and number 2 defenseman in a trade, albeit you're getting Matthew Tkachuk back. But most GMs would just say, hey, like let's try it again next year and go at it with the
Yeah,
same
you're right.
team.
You're right.
Why, change something that's not working? But a lot of the time when that stagnation is what can cause a team to not really improve and not be able to kind of get to that next level. And I think the fact that Zito is willing to make those types of changes even shows the team that like we're striving for excellence here. And if we're not hitting that, then we're going to make changes because we want to
Yeah.
win, right? And ultimately, if you keep things status quo sometimes, you're not lending to that, winning mentality because sometimes changes need to happen. And I really do think too that at least for the construction, like I was saying, going back to chemistry, it's almost like a peel away process where like the Panthers, they went to the playoffs a couple of years ago and lost in that series to Tampa, right? And it was like a real battle of a series. But after that, 2 seasons, they subtracted certain players. They added different players. They realized, hey, like this mix is good, but it's not good enough to beat Tampa, the Cup champs or the reigning Cup champs. So we need to change some stuff. And they did. And then last season, it's the same kind of deal, right? Like they make it to the Cup finals, but they don't go status quo. They still, make some changes to their team, right? Like they get a Tarasenko in there, they get an Oposo, they add an Ekman Larson, for example, and they're not keeping things status quo, right? Where like a lot of teams will get to that place, they'll get to that, Stanley Cup final or conference final and say, oh, well, we're just on the brink. And we don't need to remove anything, but sometimes you do need to subtract something that of talent and to add another type of skill set maybe that might mesh better in that system with your team, and that will push you over. Sometimes it could just be a matter of guys, not the fact they're not good players, but they might not mesh well together. I think that goes back to like the draft point that I was making. You can draft a team of really good players, and on the team that you drafted them from, they could have been really great and top scores and whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean when you put them together that team's going to be able to mesh, right? And I think that's why building through the draft can be tough because you see all these, points on paper of these prospects, but once you put the guys together in the room, sometimes the chemistry doesn't always mesh. And I think it takes like an active GM to kind of realize that and make the necessary trades to kind of get a room to mesh
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to just use everything available at your disposal. And like even
There's
if you
no
look
one right way, right?
right, exactly. Like how can you say that the Vegas Golden Knights were built through tanking, who won last year, right? Colorado Avalanche, they had two different rebuilds in there. I would say they got somewhat lucky as well with the players that they drafted. They made the right picks, obviously, and got elite players in there. Tampa Bay Lightning were a combination of trades and drafting, right? So drafting was huge there. St. Louis, what was that? Washington Capitals, after how many years of being competitive in 2018, what was that?
They
So,
found the right mix, right?
right, exactly. Pittsburgh Penguins, again, if you have the best player in the league, sure, I agree. There's a caveat there. If you can manage to find the top player in the NHL, sure. But even the Chicago Blackhawks, who were competitive for like an entire year, 10 years, that they were like on the top of their game. Yes, they did draft Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. Jonathan Toews was not one of the best players in the world. Like he was a really good player, but he wasn't like on Patrick Kane's level of eliteness. He was a two-way, type of player.
Overall player, yeah.
Yeah, overall type of player. The majority of that team was like built through free agency, trades over years. Like they didn't draft Patrick Sharp, right? Like
And draft Marion Hossa.
right, exactly. They built the team periodically, and that's even the LA Kings, right? Like they traded for a bunch of Flyers players to build that team. Like It's going to be a process that you literally have to chip away at every year. And if you have the luxury of getting Connor Bedard and building around him, great. An amazing first step, right? But you still have so much work to do to become an actual contender. Like if you draft Michkov, that's awesome. We have Michkov. You still have to have the team around him and the assets around to make that move when it becomes available, to get Jack Eichel when he's available, right? Like when that guy becomes available, you go get him in free agency. You go get him via trade, right? That's how the Flyers have to think over the next few years. So that's why I don't like the
Agreed.
timeline talk, because people don't really know when this team will be competitive, because it depends on how the assets materialize and what we do with them in the process. If we have one huge offseason, we could be one of the better teams in the league all of a sudden. We might still not be like a guaranteed contender. Might take 2, 3, 4, 5 years of competing for a Stanley Cup, but you slowly chip away at it every year. You slowly modify your team until you get them back to contention. That was the luxury that the Vegas Knights had, is that nobody did an expansion draft. The GMs didn't know what they were doing. You can see that with Seattle, how that panned out very differently. And there was just a plethora of good players that you normally would go out and draft or try to find through free agency, or try to find through trade, and they were just available to these guys. And they just built a squad that could win, And they
And
went to the
then
Stanley Cup
parlayed
Finals
that
the first
eventually,
year.
right?
Right. And they still didn't get it the first year, right? They lost in the finals, but
And
they
they made those
iterated
additions, exactly.
every
Different
year.
changes. I
Right.
think one thing too to point out that's interesting to me is like, and I think a lot of people probably have the same thoughts, is Florida too, one of their main things is taking chances on guys that might have underwhelmed in other spots, right? And I think that's a huge thing. Like look at Carter Verhaeghe, right? He used to be on the Tampa Bay
Of
Lightning.
course. Yeah.
He was a throwaway for them, and then look at the impact he has on Florida.
That's
Like
their Jonathan Marchessault, right?
yeah, exactly. Essentially, that they gave away. Like, look at a Forsling, or even look at a Sam Bennett. Like Bennett
Or
wasn't
or
like,
maybe our Owen Tippett.
yeah, potentially, but like, look at a Bennett, even right. Like he was having a decent career on Calgary, but it was really underwhelming for where he got drafted, and then he goes to Florida and really finds a resurgence in his
Yeah.
career. So I think it's too just being mindful of just because this player might have not performed here, it's almost like the way you build your team, right? Like just because one guy didn't perform here, maybe it's just the circumstances he was in. And when you bring him into your team and surround him in a better environment and maybe like something that might benefit his skill set more, for example, maybe they will flourish. So I think taking chances on guys like that too that might be underwhelming, that's a good thing to look at. Like I think at least something I like from the Flyers, and to kind of put a bow on it and kind of add a Flyers perspective, Briere and the staff, like every time I've heard them talk, every time I've heard them, think about, okay, what are we trying to do to improve the team? Like they're always saying we're open to all moves, we're open to all,
Right.
ideas. And I think that's really the mindset you have to have, right? Like
That's
anything could
it.
come your way, could come to Briere's desk, tomorrow morning, for example, and it could be some trade or some sort of move that you never even thought of, but it could be something that really reinvigorates or revitalizes the team or adds a really different aspect. So I think just as a manager, especially in professional sports, that's such a like an aspect, it's such a business that's like always moving, it's never really staying stagnant. You just have to always be aware that, hey, like there's always something out there that could improve my team. I got to stay open to it, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't have biases in,
And
in terms of
and
that.
and you already see that in what they've done with the team. Like, yes, they they didn't want to trade Cutter Gauthier, but they made the trade aggressively when they had the opportunity. They got Drysdale in here, right? They
Yep.
went out and they found a Ryan Paling, who a bunch of teams passed around, and now probably most teams wish they had a Ryan Paling in their bottom six, right? Like they didn't give up on Scott Lawton, but like here's their opportunity with some of these assets over the next couple of years that we might see some changes. And that's why I wanted to revisit the Travis Konechny trading conversation, because it's like I believe Konechny should be part of the solution here. I'm not scared to re-sign him. But if there's an opportunity out there that we would not be aware of, we have to be open to it always, because we're looking to build the team in the right way. And if it I'm not obsessed with draft picks, but if it's something comes back, like I didn't want to move Claude Giroux because I thought he deserved the respect of being a franchise player. But did we get the return? And this is a shout out to Chuck Fletcher. Did we get the return that helped reboost our rebuild here? Yeah. Right. Like that might be, you might look back at this pick that the Flyers make at 30, 31, 32, right? Assuming 32 at this point, right? And that ends up
Plus
hitting.
Tippett. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus Tippett. I mean, that's why I would like to revisit the Carter Richards trades. And like, yeah, while we lost because I mean everybody kind of won except for Columbus in those deals, the Flyers got
Basically,
a
yeah.
hell of a return for those players, like enough to rebuild a franchise.
Yeah, and LA wins the cup, so
So they're happy, right? So it all depends. Like, there's no one way of reacting to things, and all these people keep screaming like, "Oh, I don't like this." Like, just tank. Though I'm seeing less of that, to be honest with you, than I was. I think a lot more people are buying into that this is a process, and as long as you trust the people in charge of it, and I do trust Danny Briere, and Keith Jones from what I've seen so far. I feel like that's really what counts is that when those opportunities open up, when those draft picks are available, when that free agent is out there, when that waiver claim comes up, that you have the savvy team that knows to jump on them. And again, you're not focused on, oh, well, this player is better than the player on the other team. You're just focused on building an entire squad of good players. That's it. Good to great. And do not be mistaken, you need great players on your team to win a cup. That is without a doubt. You cannot win a cup without elite players on your team, but you usually need a few of them, right? So like Travis Konechny, while I think he's elite, there's only one guy, you know. Um, so all of that plays into the role, and yeah, you have something you want to say, Vasily?
yeah. So I just had
And I
some
think I know what you're
news.
talking about.
Yeah, I
Go
had
ahead, go
some
ahead.
news just on the salary cap, like from a Flyers perspective. So I just wanted to mention, I think, something that everybody would be interested in. So the NHL salary cap officially will
Should have
increase by
mentioned this. Yeah.
by 4.5 million to 88 million dollars. And with that jump, the Flyers will have approximately $803,000 of cap space and up to 7.3 million with LTIR factored in. So, the jump definitely is gonna help the Flyers, and there's lots of LTR are room to work with. So cap's officially
Is
going
it
up.
is it
So
only seven? No, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's only 7 million. It should be a lot more than that, right? Because of I guess it depends on who they LTI are, not just
yeah,
IR.
exactly. On who it is, and then the Johansson stuff factors in
Well,
as
that's what I
well
was
if they
saying is
actually.
Johansson and Ryan Ellis combined is like 10 million.
Yeah, so I think
Over
just with
10.
Ellis, technically it'd be like 7.3, I believe. But then
Okay.
if you add Johansson on that, once they get the clarity, that's where you get the extra money
Yeah.
essentially.
And again, don't forget, guys, we have what, close to $5 million in dead buyout space. 1 year
Yeah,
left
exactly.
on D'Angelo, and this is
A
why I
couple on
don't.
Hayes.
Yeah, that's why I don't think they're going to be doing any more buyouts. I think they're going to just eat the year. Five potentially try to trade some of these guys 50% retained for the year, like Atkinson, if they can try to move him for 50% retained.
I think it makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, I think they waited out. It's possible they buy out Atkinson, but I definitely don't think they're buying out Peterson. Like I think
No,
he's he's
because that
he's just stupid.
recapture, it's not worth it, right? You might as well just eat the 1 year, then you're done with it.
Right.
Whereas Atkinson, I think, like, would only be like a million point something as the buyout. But
Over
I even think with,
3 years.
yeah,
It'd
yeah,
probably
I
be
even,
1.8 or something like that.
yeah,
Slightly
exactly.
over
So
D'Angelo.
I think with Atkinson, you might as well too just bite the bullet and kind of play out the final year. Though I do think for Cam, like if the Flyers eat enough, maybe they can find some like team, like maybe a team like a Utah,
I
um,
think it depends
or
on how he
something.
comes in next year. If he has like a good start to the season, I think it's a lot more tenable for a team to take him for half the year or
Yeah,
whatever.
like a trade deadline move,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. But if he's playing well, right now I don't know exactly where he fits on this team, especially with the way he was playing, which is
He
why
might
I
be the
get
odd man out. Yeah.
yeah. But I really think that it's just best to suffer through it. It sucks. It sucks to say out loud to suffer through it for one more year and do not hamper your cap next year. You already have Hayes at 3.5 million on your cap next year, right? You're about to lose all these older players. The LTIRs are about to come off, right? Johansson's going to be gone. Peterson's going to be gone. Ryan Ellis, I still think has 2 years left, maybe
I
even
believe so.
maybe
Maybe two or
even
three.
he
Yeah.
might be even three. Um, I'll check it up on Puckpedia. Uh, and like I just feel like it's best to just stay patient, stay with the course, don't panic and try to get competitive. Just be like, we're gonna eat it for one more year. This is a rebuild, right? They stated that. So a rebuild would be, we're going to sit with this contract that we don't want here, but we know it's going to be gone. We
Yeah, and
know
then
it's going to be gone.
you open yourself up after that, right? Because
Right.
in basically after next
Considerably.
season, you're going to get a ton of cap space that's potentially could be used to make additions, even different types of trades. So, and once you have that cap flexibility, a lot of moves can open up, right?
Like
Depending on who's on the
n-
move player wise. So,
next year, right now, without the cap going up, and I don't even think it's listed on Puckpedia yet officially that the cap has even gone up for this year because it says they're in the negative. Um, they're stating $31.5 million of projected cap space for the Flyers. And that's without this increase. So it's probably closer to 35 million of
yeah,
project. And this is
there's
without re-signing players that need to be re-signed. So it
but
won't
still
be won't
a
be
lot of
that
money.
high.
A lot of money though.
Yeah, and the following year in 26, 27, 48.7 million. Now again, it won't stay that way, but it shows that it jumps that much over this 1 year. So you can tell this 1 year is like, and that's almost like if Mitchkov doesn't end up coming over this year and he comes next year, fine. It sucks for us, but as far as like a plan,
You can
you're
add around him. Yeah.
I mean, and he's a year older. He's still going to have like a $3.5 million cap hit, regardless of what his initial cap hit will be because of signing bonuses. So, that's a substantial amount of money. So let's just say Flyers will have about 20 million in cap space the following year. We can confidently say that. That is substantial.
Yeah.
And that's without the cap going up again, right?
Which it
So,
will year to year here. So
right. So it's most likely going to be around 25 million with players signed, with Konechny resigning, with the players getting their
you can
extensions.
do a lot with that money, right? And
Right,
you're bringing a really elite potential talent like Mitchkov that could draw interest from other players that might want to play with him. So
right.
it's a good situation to lend yourself into. And why subtract from that cap space when you don't have to? When you probably know, okay, you moving an Atkinson or not moving, but you buying out an Atkinson, you buying out a Peterson, is that extra money really going to benefit you that much this season? Like, it doesn't really make sense from a roster building
Like
perspective. So you may as well wait, right?
I would say the caveat would be if there is a player, let's just say, who's the top free agent? Not Stamkos, like a younger free agent guy. Is there
Let's go
anybody
like
even?
Teravainen or
Uh,
something. I don't know.
what's his name from Florida? Oh my God, Reinhardt, right?
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Let's just say this is completely hypothetical. This is not happening. Let's just say he wants to be in Philadelphia. Like
Okay.
that's where he wants to be. He'll even sign here for let's say 9.5 million, right? So it's a reasonable cap hit for a guy who just put up 50 goals. You're like, okay,
Yes,
we,
taking it.
maybe then you buy it. And you're like, okay, we have an opportunity to add this top end guy here, and all of a sudden we're going to be a more competitive team immediately. Maybe then we consider a buyout for one of these players, right? Because it'll give us the money we need to inject the guy in currently. But we know the Flyers aren't doing any of that, right?
Yeah.
So we don't need to worry about that because that's not happening anyway, right? And Reinhardt's not going to want to come here because we're not good enough to attract the top free agents yet. Unless Mitchkov comes here, which I could see some players being drawn to that. I think for the most part, most veterans are not going to really care that are, on the second half of their career or towards their last 4 or 5 years they're not going to be interested in coming here if they're like a big money player.
Well, yeah, they're going to be looking to either, add a Stanley Cup to their resume if they haven't, or they're going to be looking at like maximum dollars.
Right.
So,
Well, doesn't this show kind of like not Florida's process exactly, right? But it shows the process working in action, right? What do you have available to you? The draft and minor free agent signings, waiver pickups. Do you have or trades, right? So those are the four options you have. But what are you really limited by? These money restrictions, right? So you have to get super creative, look for Ryan Palings, look for Garrett Hathaways, look for these guys to kind of make you more competitive culture wise.
Staff
Like you're,
Forslings, like
yeah,
Florida, right?
you're looking for those golden nuggets. Hopefully you find one. You have one more year until this cap opens up, and then you can go out and get a guy that you truly believe in if he's even available at that time because it might be the following year. So you have to really be patient and not hamper your cap situation because you want to be competitive right now. And I feel like this is what really sunk Fletcher is for whatever
He
reason. I don't
spent. He spent a lot.
he
Yeah.
spent when he didn't have it to spend. And he
It's
was trying.
biting the team now in a
Well,
sense.
and
So
we weren't good enough. Well, I guess the argument we had one great season there, but we weren't good enough to be like, oh, we're a guaranteed Stanley Cup contender. Every year we have our core down. They're all, fully developed. We weren't really at that stage. So like he kind of overbought when it wasn't the right move. If he was more patient, he probably wouldn't have sunk himself so hard. And the Ristolainen trade is pretty big proof of that. It's like we probably needed that mid first round pick, that number, I think it was 13th overall in the draft, more than we needed Ristolainen at the stage we were. And it seems like the Flyers are assessing the situation a lot better. And I think that's what's going to help us get through this is a little more patience for at least another year, until you see this team get substantially better because they have to clear out cap space. And it seems like it's happening naturally already. And if they really go out and they bring in a big name player before they're ready or whatever, it's going to hamper them even more because it's going to show that they need buyouts. They're going to have to trade assets to get rid of money. And none of that will help us get to where we really want to in the proper way. That'll be like overreaching, right? Like spending money in your bank account that you really shouldn't be spending. And then you look back at your bank account and go, ooh,
not a good idea.
that was
Yeah.
a tough month. I had some fun, but I'm broke now, right? Like that's what Fletcher did to us. And I don't feel like the Flyers are doing that. And the reason I think that image appealed to so many people, because I think it kind of brought hope that, oh, well, like we don't have to listen to the tank crowd because
There's
the,
multiple
the
ways of doing it. Yeah.
and there's a pathway that you can see of actual
You can
improvement and
point to
cap
Florida and
space
say,
and
look at this, point to Vegas,
right.
even point to Colorado. Like they drafted a bit more, but a lot of their significant, moves came through trades like Valeri Nichushkin, huge part of their cup run. Like they signed, they did not draft him. So,
Yeah.
it's not always through the draft. You got to have your big players sometimes through the draft. Like look at Florida, you got Barkov, number one center, Ekblad, number one defenseman. Usually
Yeah.
those type of pieces you might get through the draft, but to supplement and to find the right guys to supplement, it might be
But
other avenues, right?
let's be honest here though. And Ekblad's what, 28, I think, right now.
Yep.
If we rewind 4 years, how many people had Ekblad as a top 10 defenseman in the NHL?
I mean, I don't know how many people. I always thought he was a really good defenseman. Even 4 years ago, I don't know about top 10, but top 20, yeah. Because like,
Sure.
look at his points. Like he doesn't have any season where he's ever under 20 points. So
Well, but okay, but 20 points is to people a third pairing defenseman, right?
fair,
Like,
yeah.
uh, my point. I always have been high on Ekblad. This is not me diminishing him at all. My point is the perception around him was not where it is today. You know
No,
what I'm
agreed. Yeah.
saying? Is that it took time to build this team together and look at perception around Sanheim. I'm not saying Sanheim is Ekblad, but the perception around, actually, shout out to High and Wide, because we were talking about this in our chat with Jamie, is that he put out a poll of what would you rather have, Zegras or York, and I thought it was really interesting that York won pretty handedly, won that poll that he put out there.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, did you think when we drafted Cam York, which is what I was saying to people, like, did you think you'd be this high on Cam York, or were you just disappointed with Cole Caulfield? It's like, I think people just, you have to let time kind of, you have to hope, and it sucks.
Patience is key though in
It
terms of
sucks
player
that,
development, right?
yeah, but it sucks. That's not a selling point to a fan who's investing money and their time.
Patience, yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
get that, but that is the reality, So like, have things, measured internally accordingly, because that is what you're going to have to go through for this. And I would imagine we're in another year here of this removal tweaking. And I think most people who listen to this podcast agree that we're not going to see a substantial move until next year, but it's laid out for you in the financials. And if you spend time on Puckpedia, you will see that.
No, definitely.
And that is a perfect segue into our next topic, which is CapFriendly is going away after the draft and after the opening of free agency. The Washington Capitals have officially purchased the it's crazy to say, CapFriendly, as an internal tool. They will be bringing that website in-house. That is pretty upsetting to me because I'm on there all the time and I really
Yeah, I
like that
use it a
site.
bunch as well.
However, there is Puckpedia, and Puckpedia actually reached out to me a few years ago, and I feel kind of bad about it. It should have built more of a relationship to them, but they have us listed on their page. We are one of the Philadelphia Flyer media resources listed on there, so that is pretty cool. But get used to it. I mean, it's so far. I'm not really seeing anything lacking. I did love the armchair GM stuff. I didn't even check to see if they have that on here. Um, I'm
I
sure
don't
they'll
believe
have more.
so.
Yeah, but like you figure now they're going to be like the main kind of competitor for this. They're going to probably ramp up and realize
Yeah,
that
there might
a
add
lot of
some
their
features.
user base is going to go way up.
Yeah, so like I saw people even mention online, like maybe now is the opportunity to start a new site. So I'm sure there's going to be other people that might start a site as well. It's kind of similar.
Yeah.
My thoughts on it is like, at least I was really surprised because I use CapFriendly a ton. So it kind of sucks that now it's going to go
Yeah, I
dark and we
know.
can't really use it. But Puckpedia is a good resource as well. And I've used it in the past too. But basically, like my thoughts is either the Capitals wanted to acquire all the data associated with CapFriendly and make sure all the other teams could no longer use it, which is possible. Or maybe they wanted to hire some of the CapFriendly team,
I
and
think
then
that's what it is.
also use the infrastructure of the site as well, right? Internally, like you were saying, and then this is kind of their way of doing that. But I'm interested, like the Capitals haven't really put out like a press release or at a press conference or really
Well,
explained the
so this,
idea. So I'm
this
interested to
is
see
this
what
is
they
what I
mention.
heard from Charlie O'Connor, so I'll give him credit on here because from what I understand, this is what Elliot Friedman was talking about, that it was discovered because teams were trying to renew their so there's a they have like a different they have like a public model for us to use, and then they have like the business model which you can actually like partner with Cap Friendly
Oh,
and
interesting.
get their resources internally, which is kind of pathetic. Not that Cap Friendly is pathetic, it's pathetic that there is no resource available to NHL teams through the
Yeah, it's kind of
NHL,
funny to think about
that
it.
they were trying to renew and found out that they couldn't renew beyond and that's how Elliot Freeman found out that they couldn't renew beyond the draft and free agency, and that they were going to finish out their agreement with the teams, the NHL teams now, and then the Caps are going to get it internally for themselves. um but I hope that this actually is kind of a wake-up call to NHL teams, to the NHL, is like there is a huge demand for this resource. Not only just for us, but for the teams in the NHL. There has to be a dedicated resource for them, for one. And for us, there's Puckpedia, who's going to be the leader, and we'll shout them out here every single time now, um, as I want them to grow. But, that this is in high demand. Like, this is something we
This
pay
type of
attention to a lot.
service.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. No, it is kind of weird that, NHL teams don't have their own sort of like algorithm or some sort of software they're
I think
using
each team
in-house.
has their own solution. So some were
I'm
going to Cap Friendly, some have their own.
Yeah, exactly. So like I mean maybe this is going to start other teams kind of focusing in on that more and kind of trying to build that out more in-house. So I guess we'll see. The fun part of it for me, at least the fun part about the acquisition is you have the Capitals buying Cap Friendly, so they're kind of adding to their
You think they're
Cap
going to
sort of
change the
brand.
name Capitals Friendly internally?
Oh man, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a kind of a bummer, but also, congrats to those guys and getting a big payout and getting the recognition. And shout out to Puckpedia because they're going to be our voice now. Um this is all seems to be pretty topical stuff. I don't know how I managed to do this, but GM voting. Just want to talk about it real quick. So there was GM voting around from the media for GM of the year, and Danny Briere managed to get one vote for GM of the year, which um, I think is kind of well deserved. And I think if the team produced better on the ice, like I think if they made the playoffs, I think he probably would have got more votes. I don't think he deserves GM of the year just because there are teams that were more successful this year than the Flyers. But in the little that he has done so far, and we obviously have been kind of raving about the Flyers' patience and patience yet aggressive nature at the exact same time. He's had a lot of stuff to do, and he seems to have, I don't want to say aced them, but he seems to have done a pretty good job with pretty much everything that's been put in front of him. The Gauthier one's the only one where I think everybody would still rather have Gauthier, at least on the surface level, from the fact that Drysdale is injured and that everybody was so hyped about Gauthier. But outside of that, I mean, he did kind of everything we wanted him to do. And even, the Sean Walker trade, bringing in Ryan Paling, and we'll see. He obviously drafted Mitchkov, and they have another really important draft coming up here. I mean, he's been pretty lights out, and it's nice to see him get a little bit of that shout out.
Yeah, I think a big thing for Briere is just his ability to pivot. Like there's so many situations that have kind of come at him from out of nowhere, and he hasn't looked
Mm,
like out of the water or really like somebody who's been overwhelmed. I think that's probably a big part of it, right? Like
that's for
who could
sure.
expect all these things coming and it kind of affecting the team this year when you go like the Carter Hart news, the Cutter Gauthier trade. And then even last offseason with Provorov and the whole Hayes situation. So yeah, he's dealt with a lot in really a short tenure at this point, and he's hasn't really ever, at least in my opinion, hasn't really made any moves or made any decisions that have kind of had me step back and kind of questioned, okay, like why are we doing this, or like a lack of faith. And I think that probably lends into the voting. It's kind of funny when you look at the whole list because so we can go through it. Like Jim Nill is first with 118 points in the voting. Patrick Alvin, Vancouver's GM, 66 points in the voting is second. Bill Zito, Florida's GM, is third. Chris Drury, New York's GM, New York Rangers, is fourth. Don Sweeney, Boston's GM, is fifth. Barry Trotz, Nashville's GM, is sixth. Kevin Cheveldayoff, Winnipeg's GM, is seventh. Ken Holland, Edmonton's GM, is eighth. Don Waddell, Carolina's former GM, is ninth. And then you have Briere at 10th. And then Chris McFarland, Colorado's GM, at 11. Then Kelly McCrimmon, Vegas's GM, at 12. Like it's kind of crazy that Briere for me is ahead of McFarland and McCrimmon, but that just speaks, league wide to kind of the job that he's done, right? That
Yeah.
he's ahead of two teams with that were really contenders going into the year in Colorado and Vegas. So speaks to kind of the work Briere's doing and the fact that I think he's willing to, like we said, explore all options.
Yeah, and I think it's been a really nice change from Fletcher, who I think doesn't get enough credit for the things he did right, but the things he did right or wrong definitely damaged this
Yeah.
team. He created as much damage as he did positive stuff. Like
Uh,
he has a few wins, but we can attribute some of those wins to Brent Flair too. So
No, of course. And I think too for Briere, the main thing, and I think tons of people can understand and see this is just the creativity. Like if you look at Fletcher's style of being a GM and how he kind of tried to acquire assets, it was a very old school method. It seemed like there wasn't much creativity in the moves he was making, whereas Briere is like a complete opposite, and he'll kind of explore any avenue if
right,
it will better the team. So
multi-team trades, whatever,
I don't
retention.
think Chuck Fletcher had one multi-team trade in his whole tenure.
And
So
I believe, yeah, I think you're right. I believe Keith Jones mentioned this during the press conference that he called Danny Briere a really tough negotiator, and I believe that. Like,
not surprising. Look at
yeah,
how he was as a player. He wouldn't give an inch as a smaller guy. Look at those battles in the corner. So I
right.
can only imagine the way he used to battle on the ice in the corner. Similar probably on the
I
phone
think,
when
yeah,
negotiating.
I think
So
he's highly competitive, and I think he comes with a plan, like ready with a plan, like,
which is
and
good.
yeah, and always willing to walk away. And that's why I think it's so important the Flyers take it slow this year, is that you're still in a position where you have leverage in the position you're in. Because they know you're not being aggressive, they can't hold anything over you. They can't
Yep.
hold the retention over you. They can't ask you for more assets because you'd be like, okay, well, no deal, right? And that's why I think it's smart that he moved Cutter Gauthier so early because before it got to that deadline, he's like, well, I don't have a deadline. So I can, I have another, what, year and a half or whatever of retention when I traded this guy. So, you can have him now and give me what I want, or you can wait until somebody else gives me a better offer over the next, 18 months. So I think it was really smart. It was like one of those things where it was like, I'm not bullshitting here. Like if somebody doesn't want to be here, they're gone. Somebody doesn't give me an offer, I'm walking away. And if I have to not trade Sean Walker at the end of the year, I would have done that because I can say, hey, we're fighting for a playoff spot, right? But because he was in that position, he was able to get that first because the teams wanted the asset, and he could say, well, okay, then I'll hold on to him, and we know that we have a better chance at the playoffs with him. And I go, it's either make the playoffs, right? Or get a first round pick. And he chose get the first round pick, which I think was the right move retrospectively, right? But making the playoffs was his other avenue that he could tell the other GM and be like, well, we're still fighting for a playoff spot here. Right.
yeah,
And this
great
is
way
what
to negotiate. So
It's all about leverage. Everything's always about leverage, and he has it right now, and I think he's utilizing it properly. All right. Next piece of news we have is the NHL Combine happened. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we can just talk about that draft in general and around this. But there are the top performers from the NHL draft. I don't really care that much about this stuff. I'll say that because,
Doesn't always translate, right? Like you can
well,
have a great score in a certain competition, but that doesn't mean it's going to make you a really good hockey player
it
at the end of the day. So,
they're also so young that
yeah.
just because somebody excels in something now doesn't mean that they're going to be the best at that down
Yeah.
the line. You know what I
Well, and
mean?
some of these younger guys, they're not even fully really matured or fully
Right.
grown or really in their
Exactly.
bodies yet that they're gonna actually like spend the majority of their careers as NHL players. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. But obviously, if somebody performs really well, it's a good thing.
Yeah, but it does show you why some of these guys are ranked where they are, or why they're having like great second halves because maybe they're maturing quicker or they take their fitness more seriously. For instance, like left hand grip, Jet Luchenko is on the top of that list. Caden Lidstrom is number two. Again, Sasha Boyver. I'll stick to the players that people probably would know. He's number four. Um, Brandiseg Nygaard, Michael Brandiseg Nygaard, the Swede was number five on that list. Cole Bedouin. I still don't even know how to say that name properly.
Baudouin, I don't know. I'm
Bedouin,
Canadian.
Bedouin.
I should know,
Yeah,
but I don't.
he
So
was seven. So I'm just looking at top 10 here, and then the right hand grip, Chet Luchenko was top of that again. Hayden Lindstrom was second. And then it kind of, Nygaard was on there as seventh. So again, they're all pretty close, except for Chet Luchenko, who seems to be far and away have the best grip strength, both hands. The duration test went to Cole Bedouin. I don't again. Um,
it's a good
Gabe,
effort, Yariv. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
Gabriel Eliasson was number two.
It's a fun
Again,
Swedish name,
yeah,
Gabriel
yeah.
Eliasson. Love it.
I will say the kid Dean Letanro, I forget how to say his name. The
I don't
big
know
kid, the
either.
6'7".
The project, yeah.
Yeah, so he's on there for duration, which I thought was kind of interesting. Though he's going to be a project, but probably a late first round pick. Stain Solberg, who's kind of climbed up the charts, the
Dude,
defenseman.
I gotta
He's
say that
number
name,
10.
like as a hockey name, Stain Solberg, that is like that's
I'm probably
impeccable, man.
I'm probably saying it wrong. He's probably
You,
Styan or something like
but
that.
still, like just get this. I mean, just
Yeah,
imagine coaches like somebody cover this shit Stain,
yeah.
right? Like imagine that. I love it.
The VO2 Max, Oliver Josephson was number one, tied with
That's a big
TJ
one because that's
Ginla.
cardio, right?
Yeah.
That's cardio based. So that's usually a big test there.
Yeah, duration and VO2 max are both kind of, but TJ Ginla's top of that list, which I'm not surprised at
Think
all
about the genetics, right?
because of who
Yeah.
his father is, but also like the type of guy his father is, like how important it would be for his son to be in good shape. And then Macklin Celebrini was fourth on that list. And then hand and wingspan measurement. See, this is one where I'm like,
What does this really mean or
yeah,
matter?
yeah.
Like
Well,
at this point.
Letanru was obviously top by far top of that list, and then Eric Emery or EJ Emery was third on the list. And I've been seeing his name at the end of the first round. He also had the best body fat percentage, EJ Emery, so looking lean. And Sam Dickinson was number two, tied with Emery. Um, Nothing really like the high jump. Emery won that again by far. So you can see like this is where I'm almost like kind of risky. Is like, okay, so you love the guy who's like, kind of a physical freak, but that doesn't,
It could just be at this age that he's that, right?
yeah, and
Not like
also
in
might not
5 years from now.
materialize into hockey. Like he
That's what I
had by
mean.
far the highest vertical jump.
But what
Emery
does that
did.
do? Like good leg strength, I guess, for skating? Like what is that?
Yeah.
How does that pertain to hockey? Like I don't know. Like I some of these make sense to me. Like some of these combine things. I mean, how many times have we gone in the past and there was guys that like were not good in these and like are
Yeah.
really good hockey players? So
Right.
it doesn't always translate. The hockey sense I always find is a big one. You can't
Yeah.
measure how to think the game and where to go on the ice. And usually
Yeah.
if you're good at that, you're a pretty good player. So
And then Jet Luchenko was second on the vertical jump, and then no arm jump. Emery again.
So he can
Chet
jump really
Luchenko
high, I
was
guess.
fourth. Squat jumps, Emery was fourth. Yeah, I
So
don't really care too
if
much.
any team, I mean, if any team takes fitness into account, EJ Emery, like, don't be surprised if he's in the first
Right.
round at some point, maybe.
That's kind of what this tells you is that, like some of these guys are in better peak physical condition than other. The one I really liked is Zeev Boyum. He had the most pull-ups, which again not relevant to hockey at all. But
Yeah, right.
Zeev
Like,
Boyum with 16 pull-ups.
he's
Um,
training, man. Let's go.
yeah. Lucas Fisher was second. TJ Gindel was third with 13. I can bust out. I can pretty much do 16 pull-ups, but I'm a full-grown man.
I
So
think like 16 to 20 for their age, like that's pretty solid.
if they hit 20, that's at that age, it's ridiculous. Like there are probably
Yeah.
NHL players that can surpass that substantially,
Oh
but
yeah, for sure.
being a teenager and doing that kind of stuff, because not all these guys really understand fitness. Like we know that Michkov wasn't like killing, like he was spending more time on the ice than in the gym. You know
And
what I mean?
honestly, I do think that like when you're a player developing at that age, sometimes it can be more beneficial to be on the ice. I think when you're making that transition to pro hockey, then
Right.
maybe that's when the
That
fitness needs to come in, right?
that's exactly what I was thinking, where I'm like, a lot of these guys are going to take their fitness more seriously once they hit pro hockey. So it's like
Exactly.
none of this really matters.
Pretty much. Yeah. You know, think
Kind of.
about it from this
It
perspective, like
just doesn't matter much.
no, but like think
It
about
matters a little bit.
you think about being a 18-year-old, like were you like deep into a fitness regimen at that point?
Well,
Like I don't know,
you know what
right?
I think this was? I think this is like one because we know, so we know that this was like something that's been around for a while. I think this is something that's like a little bit
Well, they
historic.
always do the combine, of course.
I
Yeah.
think it's a little more historic than it is relevant today because you can get
Agreed.
like a lot of like you don't need this type of information today. This seems like kind of what they looked at back in the day, and it
Agreed.
was an
Yeah.
opportunity to get all these players in one room.
And talk to
Um,
them
right,
potentially.
because they didn't
Well,
have
I
cell
know
phones and video calls and email, it wasn't the same back in the
Well,
day.
I know a big part too is like they do teams do a lot of interviews with these
Yes.
players prepping up to the draft. So I think maybe some of the interview process might be even more important, like figuring out the character of a guy.
Yeah.
I saw online like this crazy thing. Apparently, some NHL team was asking,
Utah.
yeah, or it was
The
Utah
Utah.
exactly. You know
Yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
Utah was asking players like how much would they tip their Uber driver and
No,
like
what was their Uber score? What
or
was
Uber score. That's
what
what it
was
was.
their
Okay.
review score from that the
I,
driver gave them? What was their average review score?
Which, like, I mean, I don't know how much of a
Well,
indicator that is. Like,
I
I
feel like
understand how you treat service workers can kind of tell a story about like if you're a piece of shit or not.
are you
But
hiding
like,
it? Are you
yeah,
hiding
exactly.
that you're a
But
nice
also
guy?
like you gotta factor in
Humble
and
guy.
these guys are 18, so I don't want to say like, oh, these guys are
That's
getting in
also the
Ubers.
problem. Yeah, that's
Like,
also the problem.
like first of all, are they even Ubering a lot at this age anyway? Like, who knows? Like usually the only time I use an Uber is if I'm drinking. All these guys are below that age to even legally do that. So that's one thing to factor in. But like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much these scores are really a big deal.
I
Personally, I would ask different questions to tell character. That's my opinion.
Yeah,
But
I don't think it matters that much, but I do agree with you. I think the interviews, it's an opportunity to interview guys without pulling them away from their life. And
for
you have your
sure, yeah.
team on hand and scheduling, we always assume scheduling is easy as being fans, but as somebody who's worked a professional career and you as well, like getting meetings together is annoying. So
Yeah.
you just
Oh,
have access to
100%.
everybody there. You don't have to ask them to fly over. Like that's why it was such a big deal that we got Mitch Cobb over. We like flew him
Yep.
here for 2 days and had him in our facility. Like that was dedication by Mitch Cobb to be like, oh yeah, I'm in. Like that doesn't normally happen. What happened with Mitch
Oh,
Cobb?
I
That's why it was such a
agreed.
big deal. That before a player is yours, you're spending 48 hours with your organization. At your stadium with your ownership and leadership and decision makers. That was a huge pick for the Flyers, and
Huge factor. All that. Yeah.
yeah, and that kind of goes into the next topic, and I guess the big piece that I took away from everything, and this was going, I saw this on Twitter, is that the Blackhawks did take Levshinov out to dinner, and that was the only player that they took out to dinner. Um, Look, I've said it from the beginning we started talking about this draft. D will go above forwards. It happens every year. We're always in denial about it because everybody always wants the flashy guys. But defensemen, top defensemen are so hard to find.
And you need
And
one to win. Look at any
yeah,
like past cup team in the last 5 years. They all have a really solid top defenseman or
yeah.
top pair. So
So while Demidov might have the highest projection, none of that really matters because we can't actually project players 100%. But it does seem like they will be going with Lev Shinov at number two, which should kind of shift the narrative a little bit. I think, he was kind of slated by most people to go number two, but I think it kind of at least clarifies that. And I'm sure that NHL teams kind of assume that Lev Shinov will be going number two anyway, because he's probably
yeah,
number two on majority of teams' list because of the fact that he projects to be a potential number one defenseman. And they already have they have a slew of other forwards there, but they have their number one center. If they can get their number one defenseman,
it makes sense
for
for
the
the
future,
Blackhawks. Yeah.
check.
The
Um,
way to build a team, right? You want to get that number one D, obviously, and things like that. So no, it totally makes a lot of sense. And I would say too, like if you look at Demidov, I did see some rumors and some things kind of stating that it's possible, like there's certain teams and there's certain rumblings that he might fall potentially, and he might not even get selected in that top five. So interesting, right? Similar to kind of the
I think it's gonna
Mitchkov
be all D.
narrative.
I think it's gonna be all D, dude.
It could be like if you're the Flyers, here's a caveat. Like if you're the Flyers, let's say Demidov drops to like 7 or 8. Does that interest you to try to move up to grab him?
I think I'd be interested, but I don't think we'd be willing to pay the price for it, which
Fair.
would
Yeah, I think it would be a huge price, of course.
it would at
Exactly.
least cost our second first round pick. And I think the Flyers are more interested in doubling up their odds. Um,
Yeah.
rather, I guess if it depends on how low he would fall,
No, I totally
it would
agree. Yeah.
depend how low he falls. I mean, if he comes close, but then what would stop that other team from being like, at a certain point, he's the best player available. So, I don't know. It was making me think about Zane Parekh, um, who seems to be kind of listed all over the place, kind of like Carter Yakimchuk, who also
Yeah.
is listed all over the place. But like, what do you think about a guy like Zane Parekh, who it does seem like they'd be doubling up on the Drysdale one, but he's a very shifty defenseman, very potentially an 80-point defenseman in the NHL. Maybe, I don't think he's as great of a skater as like Quinn Hughes or something, but he does have ridiculous hands and he has a ridiculously quick shot. And he obviously knows how to produce points. I mean, the guy was one of the leaders in points in the entire OHL in his draft year as a defenseman. It's ridiculous to put up 90 plus points as a defenseman in your draft year. So it's like, what do you think about a guy like Parekh being taken at 12 by the Flyers? Even though he
I
doesn't.
think it's
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's totally possible that Parekh gets taken. I mean, I think the Flyers are looking for upside, at least for the defensemen, in terms of like, okay, we want guys that either are going to be the whole package, like a Yakimchuk, who kind of like really good defensively, but also has a boom offensively and has the size. And then if it's not going to be that, it's going to be a guy like almost the Makar ilk, where like, okay, can quarterback that power play, really good offensive instincts, really good first pass. So I could totally see it. Like I think for the Flyers, and the good thing for where they're at though is there's going to be a lot of players, it seems like, available that they that seem to be good picks, right? Like there's Parekh, there's potentially Zeev Boyum, Yakimchuk, Sam Dickinson, Cole Iserman, Consta Helenius, Berkeley Catton. Like there's a list of guys where typically like when you're picking at 12, you're not thinking like, oh wow, like I'd be happy with any of these guys, but really like I wouldn't mind any of those picks. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
we all have our preferences, but it doesn't seem like there's like, oh no, like we don't want him. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like there's that type of player on the board, right?
I do trust the Flyers to, yeah, I agree with that. I do trust the Flyers to pick the right player. And like, I tried looking again to like Beckett, Seneca, and you know, I'm look, I don't know enough about him, but he just doesn't seem to project as like a top player in the league, to me. But like I feel like there are teams that are gonna be really high on guys that we do not expect, and that might just because it's so muddled, like you're saying, that there's gonna be like a Jet Luchenko who gets taken really high, or that's gonna push somebody down to us that we potentially didn't expect. I'm still my top choice is still Berkeley Catton as a forward. That's exactly what I want to be drafting.
Yeah.
And
Catton is one of my choices. I think Catton or Iserman. Interesting thing that I saw
Heisman
on
I saw as
Twitter,
low as 17 at this
which is
point.
nuts. Yeah,
I
like
know.
I saw a thing with like an interesting thing is that like if you notice the Flyers selected Michkov last year, they didn't really say too much about him before the draft. And like if you notice, they haven't really said much about Berkeley Catton at all. So I wonder if they're very interested. It's kind of like a silence, like is golden type thing where like we don't want to mention it too much because we hope he kind of falls to us.
Right.
But it's definitely an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody to know who I was taking,
Yeah.
unless I was working a deal to make sure that that team got who they wanted and we got who we wanted and we were going to move up. But for the most part, I would want nobody to know who I was even, I wouldn't want anybody to know my list whatsoever. Um, but I'm still open. If we do take, like, let's say we take Seneca at 12, I'm going to assume that the Flyers know what they're talking about. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, he wasn't high on my list.
Well,
My
I mean,
list
they've
doesn't mean
seen,
shit.
yeah, they're like, let's be real, right? Like, we're all armchair GMs at this point, especially when it comes to the draft. And a lot of
Yeah.
these guys we have not seen very much. So I would say that you have to trust the Flyer scouting staff. Like, they look like they've done a pretty good job these past couple of drafts. And I think Brent Flair usually does his due diligence.
He
And
knows
he's
his shit.
shown, yeah, he knows his
I
stuff with the
trust him.
draft. And he's also, picked later and found some gems. So I think you got to kind of trust the Flyers and what they're
I,
doing here with the
I'm really
draft.
excited to have Steve on next week to talk about
Oh,
this.
it's gonna be
Somebody who's
great.
actually
Yeah.
watched these guys, for a couple years already. And
Shameless plug now for next week's episode.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then remember, we're going to be doing an episode with him before the draft and then immediately after the draft too. So, and that one I'm even more excited for to talk about
Yeah,
the
just to
players
recap it all.
we've already taken. Because I want to know who's already going to be part of this core. And the draft's exciting. I really do trust the Flyers to take the right players at this point. Even the Cole Caulfield, when we took Cam York, I wasn't like panicking when we took Cam York. I like looked into York and I was like, this is a really impressive prospect. It's like this guy has top pairing potential. I was like, that's what we need. That's why I always say, like, even if it's not the guy I want, even if it's not Berkeley Catton, did we hit? You know, if they take Consta Hellenius, it's because they believe Hellenius can be a
I
top six
honestly like
guy.
that pick to be I feel like everybody's saying, oh, it's such a safe pick. I feel like people fail to realize that he's playing amongst men. I think that's just something that everybody's
Right.
like kind of going over,
No,
right?
it's a great point. It's like when you're watching highlights and one guy's playing against the OHL and the other one's playing against like is playing in Liga, in
It's
the
completely different.
Finnish hockey league, like you're the level of competition is so different, and that's where like I watch Zeev Boyum and you don't look at his highlights as being like super flashy, but like going back to Hellenius, like yeah, okay, he's not really flashy, but why is he producing better than all of these other superstar Finnish prospects? I was
Yeah,
like, was
right.
he doing it by
There's
accident?
something to that exactly. So,
Right. So it's like he's doing something right to produce, you know?
mhm.
So I don't know. My whole thing is like I'm just gonna trust in the Flyers scouting because they've done a really good job of late. And especially since Flair has taken over. Like I wasn't excited for Tyson Forrester. I thought he was going to be like, oh, maybe this guy will end up being like a second line player. And now, like, I watch him play and I'm like,
Not
holy
gonna lie,
shit, what?
Yariv, I was really excited for him.
Okay, well, you knew better than me because I
The
was like,
reason, no, the only reason why for Forster is I heard Dale Howardchuk, the late
right,
Dale Howardchuk, like I always mention this on the show, but he was very affiliated with the Barrie Colts and Sam Cosentino, who's a draft expert on Sportsnet,
yeah,
he
he's
did not
great.
have Forster in the first round, and Howardchuk essentially reached out to Cosentino and was like, "What are you doing? You say you know draft prospects, and you totally missed on Forster." And like when you have a legend like Howardchuk saying stuff like that, like you gotta pay attention, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, you're probably right, and that's the reality, and that's why we talk about how these prospect profiles and all this stuff doesn't really matter too much. Like you have to just trust in your scouting team. And I think the Flyers scouting team has done enough right so far that you should trust that they can hit on both of these first round picks. Maybe we won't get the best player in the draft, but it doesn't have to be the best player in the draft. It just has to hit. That's it. Like Anton Lundell is not the best player from his draft, but he's a hit.
Yeah, exactly. And he's playing a key role for Florida. So
Yeah.
it's for sure. You got to get guys that can, make it to the NHL, make an impact. So
Yeah. Like I brought up Eck last time, right? Like wasn't the best player in the draft, was a hit. Big
yep.
hit. He was a later pick too. Like you need to hit on the picks you have. And a late first round pick shouldn't be expected that 31, 32 pick will be, like if it becomes a Scott Lawton, that's a hit. If it's a
Yeah, exactly.
50-point player,
Well, if you
45
even
point
make the
player,
NA, if you even get a guy that can make the NHL, usually it's a hit. I mean, obviously, if you're in the upper first round, you want them to contribute, but like
sure.
past the first round, if a guy
In
makes the NHL, that's a hit, pretty
in the
much.
range we're taking, I expect top six forward, top three defenseman,
Yeah,
right?
agreed, agreed.
And you have to at least get that out of it. If you get more than that, that's a home. Like what the Flyers
Home
did with
run. Yeah.
Michkov at 7, getting a
Oh, home run, pure
potential
home run.
generational talent, in a number 7 pick. That is, we got a first overall caliber pick with the number 7.
Oh, totally, man.
That's a
Totally.
home. That's a grand slam home run. All right. Just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify. Give us a rating there. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please do so. It's tremendous help to us. So sticking with the prospect territory. So we'll do this last prospect segment here. We'll do playoff talk and then we'll end it. So you found this about Michkov. You sent this over a little bit earlier, and you pointed out an interesting stat about Michkov that only 4 of his 19 goals scored this year for Sochi were on the power play, and 15 of them were at even strength.
Yeah, so
And
it's really interesting
yeah,
stat. I
go
wish I
ahead, go
could
ahead.
pull it up on the screen and kind of show it, but the most interesting part about it, like,
Is where the
uh,
goals are scored.
yeah,
Yeah,
if
there
you
you go.
look
There
at
you go.
that, right, you can kind of see that the goals are all scored near the front of the net. So it just shows like anybody saying, "Oh, he's a finesse only player, doesn't go to the net," completely mistaken. And if you have watched Michkov, that's one of his things, and one of the things about his game that I actually really like. That for a skill forward, he's not afraid to go to the net and try to score and try to bury rebounds, and that's usually where most of the goals are had, right in front of the net. So just
You
for
know
him
what?
to be able to go to that area at such a young age, I feel like it only bodes well for his future development as
You know what
well.
that reminds me of? Sidney Crosby. It's
Yeah,
like,
always near the net,
yeah,
exactly.
he can score goals all around the net, no matter where he's at. And I think it's interesting because Sochi definitely didn't have a good power play, right? They're one of the worst teams in the
Yeah.
league. So, like, it also goes to my previous point that elite players cannot fix your power play, not overnight like that. Like, you have to have a good power play in general.
You
But
gotta
it
have a
also shows,
quarterback, all that stuff.
yeah, it also shows that the guy can produce at 5-on-5 against men. If it was like the opposite, majority of those goals were on the power play, it would be a lot less exciting. That's like more Patrick Laine
A
territory,
little
which,
more concerning, if anything.
right.
So,
Yeah. So I think it's a really nice stat. And imagine how many goals he would have scored if he was on a better team.
oh yeah, exactly. If he was playing on ska, for example. But no, yeah, that was just something interesting I wanted to bring up regarding Michkov. Everybody loves the Michkov stats, so I figured we throw
It's a
one in
good one.
there.
It's a good
Uh,
one.
and hopefully we get some news on him in the coming weeks, right? We're still waiting
Yeah.
on that, but we'll
Yeah.
see, right? As we get
I
closer
think,
to June 30th.
yeah, we're like 3 weeks away from the deadline there. Well,
Well,
fake deadline.
keep
We
an
have no
ear out,
idea. Yeah.
everybody.
We have
Yeah.
no idea if late end of June is actually the deadline. We just suspect. And then the other thing I have here is this is another prospect list. And obviously, McKean's list had the Flyers at 17th. Scott Wheeler of The Athletic has his own list, and he has the Flyers 6th. So go figure about that one. And his
Shows the
top
disparity, right?
yeah, his top 10, and I don't agree with this order either. But his top 10 order is Michkov, Bonk, Brink. He still has Brink as a prospect, which I kind of a little confusing. Andre, Rizzo, Denoye, Kolosov, Barkey, and Ciernik, and Tuamala. I don't agree with the order of this top 10. Mine would be slightly different. I also don't know how good Rizzo is because I haven't really watched too much of him. I
Yeah.
think Tuamala, Barkey, and Kolosov should all be higher on this list.
Yeah, I feel like having Kolosov, Barkey, Tuamala. even
And I don't think
Desnoyers,
Brink should be on it at all.
yeah, even Desnoyers higher than Rizzo's kind of puzzling. Like maybe Scott really likes what he's seen from Rizzo. Obviously, like I haven't watched a ton of him, play or really a lot of footage from Rizzo, but it's just like he was, I believe, what his final year of college, and putting up insane numbers. So like when you're at that age in college, I mean,
It's
that
not the
kind of
same.
lends,
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of lends to why he's putting up those types of numbers. Whereas like you could say the same for Barkey. He's like, in his draft +1 in the OHL, but I think he's just so much younger in his development that like the upside would be higher ultimately. And even Desnoyers, like he almost had did he score 20 goals last year in the AHL? If not, he was pretty damn close. But I know he led the Phantoms in
He
goal
did
scoring.
hit 20. Yeah.
So to
Like
have
19 or 20.
yeah, so to have Desnoyers, the guy who led the Phantoms in goal scoring last season in the AHL in pro hockey, lower than a guy who's, in NCAA, like a little puzzling. But I do think that Scott's ranking in terms of like where the Flyers prospect pool is at like six, that's a lot more accurate than
Yeah. I think
17 that we talked about last week. So
yeah, and I think Mitchkov carries the big brunt of that. I think without Mitchkov, it's vastly less impressive.
it's probably more closer to 17, like
Well,
we
because
were
we
saying, right?
because we had graduates too. Like,
Yeah.
well, one we lost Gautier and replaced Gautier with
Drysdale.
Drysdale, who's the same age as Brink. So again, that's why I'm like Brink played like almost an entire season. Forrester's not on here. If you have Gautier and Forrester, and let's say you keep Brink on
Yeah.
here,
Well, if you
then
have Brink, how do you not have Forster? It just doesn't make a
because
lot
he
of
because he's
sense.
not. Yeah, that's why I'm like, and that's why I'm not shitting on Scott Wheeler at all. It's more of just like that's why I tell people not to take these too seriously. Again, the
Yeah.
Flyers had the best prospect pool in the league, ranked
And it
top
didn't really
five for
pan
multiple
out.
years,
So,
and it didn't pan out. It's like I've learned my lesson
well,
from this. That
these
just
lists are content pieces at the end of the day, right? These
right,
websites need to produce content. They need to run something. So they said, hey, write up this
yeah,
prospect list. It'll get some hits, gets people talking. So that's really what it is. I feel like a lot of this stuff, like there is an analysis, but a lot of it too is like a talking piece in a
yeah,
sense, right?
yeah. I think
So
you're right.
and it
Yeah,
helps
but
us for our show. So
I'll say this: there are at least 10 prospects on this team worth talking about that you can project to be NHL players.
which is a
Um,
great sign. Yeah.
and I like that he didn't have Ronnie Addard on there, who's almost 25 years old.
Not a
Um,
prospect. Yeah. At
yeah.
this point.
Um, yeah. So, just thought that was interesting. Just, nice change from McKean's, but that's why I don't care too much who we take because I'm just going to trust in the Flyers scouting over a scouting website, regardless of how much they watch of the player. I'm just like, I kind of trust the NHL teams more than I trust the research I do online, you know?
Yeah, exactly, for sure. And also, like, you got to think how much of these guys are these teams watching that they're really like focused on versus a scouting website, for example, that has to kind of scout all these players for all these different teams. I feel like there's less of a focus, right, from that
Do you
perspective.
do
So
you think so? I'm like thinking right now while you're talking, like so Montreal is still bitter about not taking Mitch Cobb for Ryan
you think they
Bacher. Like,
try to trade for Demidov?
well, no, I was actually thinking about the opposite that because we brought Mitchkov over, right?
Hmm.
It's a clear like no other team had that time with Mitchkov like we did, right? It
Yep.
was obvious that Mitchkov wanted to come here. He had leverage, right? He plays in the KHL. He can stay there, right? He had leverage. He could somewhat control his destiny. And he allowed himself to drop all the way to seventh, come to Philly. There's no way that Montreal wasn't interested in taking Mitchkov. He probably just didn't want to go there to some degree. I don't think he was like,
It's
oh,
totally
if I,
possible.
but I think he had leverage in his situation. And I do think about Demidov, and you're talking about him dropping. Like, I'm not saying that Philly is going to be, I mean, maybe because Mitchkov is here and they probably know each other, but, could Demidov be dropping because he also has a preference and he's in the same or very similar situation as Mitchkov,
Has a lot of
where
leverage. Yeah,
he has all the leverage. He's a high end prospect,
it's
right?
possible. I think it's definitely possible. Like, I think the thing with Michkov is Montreal was pretty adamant, and like from sources and things that we heard that Montreal just wasn't going to take the risk to take him with the whole Russia factor.
But if he
Um,
gave you the guarantee, like he
then you're
gave
definitely not
us,
going to take him. Yeah,
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, but if let's say Mitchkov went and spent 2 days in Montreal, right, with their
completely
organization,
could be a completely different story. Yeah,
don't you think they would have taken him? but
Yeah, that's what I mean.
they
Like
didn't have
if
that
you're not
relationship built with
if you're
him.
not getting that guarantee from the player, why take the risk when you could select somebody else that you know is going
Like
to want to be on the team long term, right?
because David Reinbacher, like let's say Mitchkov does the whole 3 years in the KHL. David Reinbacher is not playing for the Montreal Canadiens probably even next year, right?
Yeah,
And even if he
defenseman as
does, he's
well.
not going to
So
be a huge impact on that team.
yeah,
You know, he's going to be playing 15, 16 minutes a night, you
not
know.
much of a difference really if you look at it
You're going to make
retrospectively. So
a franchise changing decision over 1 year difference. It just seems like and we were talking about the interviews and all that. Like that is the big part of this. Is like is this guy going to fit in with our team? Does he want to be here? And when most players don't have leverage, you know, like these OHL players don't have any leverage. NCAA players do. And that's where we're angry at Gauthier because he told us he wanted to be a flyer because NCAA players do have leverage.
yeah, and then they flip the script off.
And that's
Obviously,
what
we
he
know what
did.
happens.
That's why we're
So
bitter with it because we bought into you with our fifth overall pick. You know what
yep,
I mean? We would have let you go if we knew you didn't want to be here. Right. I don't know, just something to think about.
definitely interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So last topic, NHL playoffs. As we speak right now, the Florida Panthers just beat Edmonton. I think it was 4-1. Was
Yeah,
it?
it was 4-1
Yeah,
last
it was
night.
four
Yep.
one. I'm getting the two games mixed up. So they won 4-1 in the second game. They won 3-0 in the first game. Sergei Bobrovsky has only given up one goal. Edmonton did have, you know, I wouldn't say vastly, but heavily outshot Florida in the first game. In the second game, it was all Florida. Edmonton like pretty much didn't stand a chance. The games are getting gritty out there, and I know Barkov is now questionable from a high hit on Draisaitl, who should be suspended a game for that high hit, or at least fined, and got
Yeah,
absolutely
that
nothing.
was definitely a dirty hit in my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's ridiculous that he didn't even get a fine. Um, but you know, it does lend back to what I've been saying. You know what I was actually thinking about before the series started? This reminds me of the Detroit Red Wings versus the Flyers series where we got swept, where we had Eric Lindros, who was arguably the best player in the world.
Same
You
thing with
know,
McDavid. Yeah.
right. And
Fair.
yet we couldn't win a single game against the
Well,
Red
just
Wings.
because the depth of Florida is just overmatching, I would say Edmonton in every aspect. Though I will say, like the first game, I mean, if you look at the shot totals, right? Like Bobrovsky, 32 saves, gets a shutout. Florida only gets 17 shots on net. So I do think, in a sense, like Bobrovsky steals game one, and then Florida really has all the momentum because they're at home. And then now you're up 2-0, and it's the Stanley Cup final. So it's going to be really, really hard for Edmonton to turn it
Yeah.
around here.
And
Um,
if Florida wins game three,
it's definitely over. Yeah, coming back 3-0 down in the
that's
finals with all that
curtains.
pressure,
Yeah.
it's pretty much done. Like I'll go back to it. I said it last week. Like I thought Florida would win just because their goaltending surpasses Edmonton's. I have
Yeah.
more faith in Bobrovsky as a goalie than Skinner. Not to say that Skinner can't
He's done a good
eventually do it
job
one
actually.
day, but he's a
Yeah.
very young goalie still, right? Like
Sure.
he very
He's
young.
24, right?
Yeah, exactly.
24 going on 25.
I believe so. I'm interested to actually see now. He is 25, so
25.
still very young for. Well,
Yeah.
usually age that goal um actually come back. So, um, yeah, or I was gonna say, yeah, usually the age that like goaltenders enter the league, right? Like for
Right.
Skinner at 25. So, not surprising he might be struggling a little bit in that situation. But yeah, just looking at it, like I just can't see a way that Edmonton comes back. And I mean, we did see this last with the Dallas series, but I think it's completely different in the sense that it just looks to me that Florida has all the momentum in the series. Like there hasn't been a time where Edmonton has really controlled play or controlled long stretches and been able to capitalize. Like they went up 1-0, and then Florida immediately scores 4 goals straight and beats them 4-1, right? Like they are up 1-0 and they can't even build on that. Shout out too for Florida, like Evan Rodriguez having a huge finals so
Three
far.
goals in two
Three
games.
goals in only 2 games, so he's really coming through. But I think as long as Bobrovsky continues this solid play of like either a shutout or allowing 1 goal, I think it's going to be really hard for
Well,
Edmonton to get back in
I
it.
will say this: if Barkov doesn't play next game, if he is
That's a huge
concussed,
loss. Yeah.
that's a huge change because he is a player capable of shutting down McDavid. you know?
removing him, McDavid could run wild. So that's something
Right.
they gotta obviously factor into. But we'll see what happens. Like I have a hunch that Barkov will play. I mean, if he can, right? You got to think it's the finals here. But I mean, if he can't, we'll see if Edmonton can capitalize. I think if let's say for some reason, Barkov cannot play, it'll be interesting to see if Edmonton can get back kind of into the series here, right?
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I don't want to say it's going to be over in a sweep or anything like that. So we should expect Edmonton to potentially win game 3 here and make it interesting. It would be more interesting to watch. But again, my money's still on Florida, and depth wins championships. I've been saying that. It's like you don't need to have the best player in the world. You need to have players who can play against the
You
best
need to
players
have
in
the
the world.
best team, right?
Yes.
Ultimately, not the best player, but you need to have the best team that's cohesive together and can kind of get you to
Yes.
that point.
And
So
that has size in the playoffs. And I heard, and again, I'm not knocking Charlie O'Connor because I like him and I think he's a smart guy, but I heard him downplay the size thing again, and I'm like, I don't know why you're not learning that the NHL teams are not stupid. Size is extremely
especially
physicality
in the playoffs,
is
right?
huge. It's
Well, wearing down a
huge.
team, breaking down a team,
Huge.
constantly forechecking, teams are looking to do those things in the playoffs. So
Yes. And look, Leon Draisaitl is a big dude. He took out Barkov, and that wasn't legal, but still played, still
yeah,
happened. Still gonna
exactly.
get if they come back and win because Barkov's out, they still get a
That's if
championship.
they come back and win because Barkov's out, like that play will almost remind me of Richards injuring Krejci back when the Flyers were
Yeah,
down 3-0 to Boston. But it's true though, like one player like that could have a huge difference in the depth, all the matchups. So we'll see
yes,
how Florida kind of plays it going ahead.
that's a big knock on their depth, but yeah, Florida's still my pick, and we'll see how it materializes. I think Edmonton.
Agreed. I mean, I was gonna say I hope Edmonton at least wins one game so it doesn't end up being a sweep,
Yeah,
right? Like we want to see some sort of competitive hockey. So
yeah. And I will say credit to Edmonton to show that they could play team defense. Like maybe not at the level of Florida, but they didn't get here by accident, right? And
yeah,
I
exactly.
think that's impressive. Is that the team around McDavid and Draisaitl have improved dramatically over the past several years, where they were a team that really couldn't shut teams down to now a team that was able to shut down Dallas, that was able to get outshot heavily and still win that game. That stuff matters, and they're building through that. So I would expect them to be a force next year, for sure. All right, dude, that's it. Anything you want to leave our audience with?
No. So I mean, we're coming up on the draft pretty soon, so we're gonna have a ton of content just continuing on flyersnitty-gritty.com. So please, everybody continue to read the articles, check out the website, and we're gonna have Steve on next week to kind of break
Yeah,
down the draft, and then we're gonna have him on again after the draft, and I'll also bring some insights from being live at the draft. So it's gonna be, at least in terms of like podcast content, we're gonna have some great stuff coming up. So please continue to support and listen, and we're going to bring you some of the best Flyers draft content I think probably you can find.
yeah, absolutely. Well said. Um, Again, yeah, thank you all for listening. Shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at Fourth and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak on Fourth and South from Jim's. They are reopened. And also shout out to Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for all your insurance adjustment needs. That's Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And just a reminder to please like, subscribe. If you've made it this far, please subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notifications. Follow us on iTunes, Spotify, and give us a rating there as well if you can. All of that is tremendously helpful, and we really appreciate everything you guys have done for us so far. We love you guys, and remember, always stay